Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And time for a change. A few of you are suggesting that the point at which people started talking about no deal as a viable option was roughly when the hedge fund started backing it on an epic scale. There's no way of knowing. Just as there's no way, apparently, of knowing who's donated £100,000 to Catherine Blakelock's Brexit party. Catherine Blakelock, we discovered this weekend, she's the one that founded the Brexit party and then had to resign because her social media feed turned out to be full of toxic far-right rhetoric. But she's still there. She's still on the board or similar. Fascinating. I'm sure that people will be asking lots and lots of questions about that. But as we turn our attention to matters Brexit related, I'm really, I'm probably a bit like you. We split down the middle on this because I do find it fascinating. I knocked out 1,500 words for the TLS yesterday about a book that details Jeremy Corbyn's rise to the top of the Labour Party, and I feel very similarly about that. Academically, it's fascinating. I'm an anorak on such matters. I love trying to work out what's going on and where things are going. Unfortunately, as we established in the last hour, when the answers are blindingly simple and horribly unpleasant, it rather robs you of the pleasure of analysing what those problems are. But I don't know what's going to happen next on this. The reason I mentioned no deal is, of course, because nobody was punting no deal, ever, until roughly the middle of last year. I asked in November of 2017, and when I say that, that's just the earliest example I can find. I'm sure I was asking before that. Who were the campaigners? Who were the people during the referendum campaign telling us that we definitely wouldn't get a deal and that would be good? And the reason why I'm a little sceptical, although I can see why they're attractive to people on my side of this particular argument, the idea that it's the hedge funds that have done it, it might be true, but it's not the answer to the question that I ask. I think Theresa May floated this boat. I think Theresa May, of all the lines that have been shown to be ridiculous, either by design or by accident, of all the lines that Theresa May has uttered, and crikey, should we do a top 5 or can we stretch to a top 10? I mean, Brexit means Brexit and leave means leave are akin to tattooing "I'm an idiot" across your forehead. So that's a given. So there's 2 there, not 1, although I guess they're identical. Brexit means Brexit and leave means leave. I found Citizens of Nowhere to be particularly repellent, for reasons that I'm sure we don't need to go into as we look at I'm not going to dwell upon it unduly, but as we look upon the birth of the latest member of our royal family, you see just how ugly that phrase, Citizens of Nowhere, truly was when Theresa May uttered it. Similarly, queue jumpers. Do you remember when she said queue jumpers? That was a particularly repellent little bit of rhetoric from Theresa May, leaning towards the far right of her own party without having the wit to realise that if she leans towards the far right of her own party, she legitimises what is currently the furthest right bits of her own party, which compels and empowers them to go even further to the right, which they are now doing. So Brexit means Brexit, leave means leave, Citizens of Nowhere and queue jumpers. Those are my top 4. You're more than welcome to add to that list, but maybe do it by text on 84850. Because I think the worst one of all is no deal is better than a bad deal. I don't think, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was the point at which this no deal notion entered into the mainstream discourse. It's July of last year when it first became clear to you and me that we were probably heading towards no deal or no Brexit. But even then, even in July of last year, when we first started wondering whether that was how the cards were falling, everybody insisted that no deal was impossible. Because, and then we go back to the pre-referendum lines about they need us more than we need them, the German car industry, all of the reasons we were given at the time as to why no deal was an absolute impossibility. An absolute and complete impossibility. And then as all the promises that were made fell apart, the ignorance to be kind, the delusional deceptions to be less kind, as it all fell apart, what was the line that worked best for that one? The minute you write it down, it falls apart. So the minute that the speech which laid out the red lines was made. The notion of a Brexit that was anything other than disastrous for Britain moved further away. When they wrote down the Chequers Agreement, Boris Johnson and David Davis ran for the hills because when you write it down, it falls apart. There's a reason why parties contesting the European, or I think just one party contesting the European election won't have any policies at all, because they know, just as I know, that when you write it down, it falls apart. So if you're still trying to pump Brexit, the only way you can do it successfully now is to have no policies at all, just to say, we'll jump out the window and everything will be fine. Trust me. The people saying trust me are, of course, the same people that said trust me when they said the German car industry won't allow it, or we can be like Norway or Switzerland, or they need us more than we need them. I mean, even I'm getting bored of pointing this stuff out on a regular basis, but I have to, because for many people the penny still hasn't dropped. So that line there, I think, is Theresa May's doing. No deal is better than a bad deal. That's question number one for fellow anoraks. Who introduced no deal into these discussions? Because if Theresa May had any wit about her, then she would be pointing out that it's the European Research Group that have scuppered Brexit. It's them that failed to vote for the Brexit she secured. And because the Brexit she secured was so obviously inferior to the status quo, she gave them an opportunity to claim that there was some other mythical Brexit that would actually still be better. But if she hadn't floated the no-deal boat, I wonder whether the ERG could have done that. This isn't one of those mornings where I think I've got a perfect bead on proceedings and I just invite you to ring in with agreement or disagreement. This is one of those mornings where your bead upon this subject is just as interesting as mine. I'm just opening up the phone lines for contributions and contemplations rather than consensus, conviction or argument, conflict. But is that true? I mean, when did no deal become a thing? After a campaign, long after a campaign that insisted it wasn't even on the planet. It wasn't even on anybody's list of things that were possible. How do you know that? Because of what they all said during the referendum campaign. We'll be in Berlin doing deals, said David Davis. We'll be having our cake and eating it, said Boris Johnson. We'll be on the sunlit uplands, he added. We'll be like Norway and Switzerland, said Farage. We'll be... The German car industry won't countenance it, said Lord Digby Pudding-Jones. I mean, they all told us that the deal would be great. It would be brilliant. They all told us that, every single one of them. You have to go back to 2012 to find that footage of Patrick Minford telling the truth, actually, the economist of choice for the European Research Group, who said that no-deal Brexit will essentially run agriculture and industry into the ground, which is what Project Fear also explained, but they got written off as Project Fear. Now they're turning to the bloke who, in many ways, is the architect of this idiocy and giving him another run around the block. It's fascinating to me, this. Genuinely fascinating. And, of course, you can sit there and say, I knew all along I was voting for no deal, and I say, prove it. Who were you for? I didn't follow anyone. I did my own research. I voted for no deal. Then why didn't you stand up during the referendum campaign and defend people who were being written off as Project Fear? You should have stood up and said, no, they're absolutely right. We are going to have to leave with no deal. It's not Project Fear at all. It's Project Fact, but it's a good thing. Who promoted no deal before that vote came in? Because if we are moving towards a place where no deal is a possibility, then in a rational universe, the necessity of a second referendum becomes irresistible. Absolutely nobody voted for no deal. And I hate saying this, but if you are now claiming that you voted for no deal, you're lying. The important thing there isn't that you're lying to me. The important thing there is that you are lying to yourself. And when you start lying to yourself, the door is thrown wide open for politicians like Donald Trump, who recently passed the 10,000 mark on lies recorded and proven during the course of his presidency. The 10,000 mark. The doors are thrown wide open for utterly disgusting individuals. Think about what poor Jess Phillips has had to endure recently with a UKIP candidate recording a video in which he discusses the possibility that he might rape her. And then think how Donald Trump dealt with actual allegations of sexual assault by casting aspersions upon the physical attraction of some of his accusers. He did it. He's done it. Not in theory or in satire or in comedy. Donald Trump did it in real life, in plain sight. Women come forward with allegations of sexual assault, and he cites their physical attributes as somehow being relevant to the validity of the accusation. In other words, saying they're not good-looking enough for me to sexually assault. He's the President of the United States of America. So you've got some no-mark on the internet indulging in identical mental gymnastics, and you're getting outraged about that while giving a free pass to Chummo in the White House? You're part of the problem, not the solution. But I digress slightly. If nobody was promoting no deal, where did it come from? We'll start with that, and then we'll move on to the likelihood of May getting this deal through the Commons. Through the columns. She'll never get it through the columns, but I'm beginning to think that she might get it through the Commons. It was January 2017 at that infernal Lancaster House speech in which Theresa May first argued that no deal would somehow be better than a bad deal. There's a rather good essay on the LSE website which seeks to explain that is what she didn't mean by that was what it has subsequently come to mean. The idea that no deal is better than a bad deal led us towards this ludicrous notion where we're now on the brink of jumping out of a window of a 30-storey building without having any idea how on earth we're going to get back to ground level. She was, according to this piece by a reader in politics at Manchester Metropolitan University called Craig Berry, he suggests it was a deliberate attempt to confuse, and that it was looking more at the long-term reciprocal arrangements, the long-term arrangements that may follow. It was, I don't quite follow the reasoning here, but the idea is that no deal is better than a bad deal became co-opted by, this was Theresa May's fault, problem, error, all the way through. She's completely underestimated just how bad and mad the hard Brexiters are. I think that this is the closest thing I've got to a nugget. Because my theory all along was that she would wait until somebody like Boris Johnson or Michael Gove was forced to publicly concede that they'd made a terrible, terrible mistake. Massive miscalculation of the scale of ego involved in a man like Boris Johnson and the scale of ambition involved in a man like Michael Gove. I presume their political careers would in many ways be over if they were to admit that they had horribly, horribly misled the nation in 2016, largely in their two cases because they didn't think there was any possibility whatsoever of winning. But that was the most charitable analysis I have, is that Theresa May has underestimated just how mad and bad these people are, which would also allow an explanation of why she keeps pandering to them, because she thinks eventually they'll go, oh, OK, you've done your best. But then, of course, they keep voting against the only Brexit that anybody was ever going to be able to secure. And they go running off to market claiming that there was a brilliant one. Absolutely brilliant Brexit that was easily achievable, but it goes to a different school. Two frontrunners in the Tory leadership campaign, Boris Johnson and Dominic Raab, both claiming that they can go back to Brussels and get a better deal. It's quite incredible when you look at it with a degree of objectivity. Still claim that so she's failed again and again and again and again to do X. So the two men vying to replace her as Prime Minister, to replace her as leader of the Conservative Party, are campaigning mostly on X. Theresa May's position has become untenable because she can't get anything, quotes, better, end quotes. So the two men vying to replace her are campaigning on the platform that they'll be able to get something better. And then, of course, you've got the really dangerous, delusional liars claiming that no deal will be anything other than an absolute disaster. And because most of us are far too busy to look into this stuff for ourselves, you can see why some people fall for that. What's going on? 0345 6060973. The no deal thing, I've got it as back as January 2017 with a informed an analyst saying she never meant crashing out with no deal. She didn't mean blind Brexit when she said no deal. Well, what did she mean then? And given that absolutely nobody campaigned for it, how has it become a thing? I'd love to hear your thoughts and theories on that, whichever side of the debate you're on. Given that absolutely nobody campaigned for this thing, how has it now become a thing? 0345 6060973. A campaign that succeeded precisely because its key players told us that we'd be able to secure all manner of magical deals has somehow morphed into a claim that we all knew all along that there wouldn't be any deal. If I've just described you, then take a moment out of your day to talk me through that journey, okay? How have you gone from voting for something that all of the chief champions of told you would involve magical deals, deals the like of which you've never seen before, the finest deals, the best deals, the greatest deals. Now you're claiming you knew all along there'd be no deal. I may even try not to interrupt you, so interested am I in the labyrinthine course that your mind must have taken over the last 3 years. Let's start in Oxford. The phone lines are open, 0345 6060973. I get this a lot at the moment. If May were a man, you'd say she was only interested in herself. Her being a woman is blinding you. I don't think you're right in this specific case, but I do think I'm hostage to my upbringing, and I can't look at a woman of a certain age having a horrible time without feeling sympathy and even a bit protective. That's paternalistic, patronising, patriarchal, all of those things. I suppose the law of Widdicombe kicks in again here, doesn't it? Perhaps. 11:39 is the time. Dermot's in Oxford. Dermot, what would you like to say?
I think the main thing is the idea that there was a no deal ever on the table. It's just not realistic.
Well, it isn't to you, but I'm inundated with people on Twitter who claim they knew all along that that's what they voted for and what was going to happen.
Let's have a few facts. The United Kingdom had signed up to an international deal, I think it was 1996, the Good Friday Agreement.
Yes.
And that was predicated on Britain being part of the EU.
Yes, it was.
And
Ireland. I mean, it was predicated on both. I mean, the text of the agreement states the European Union countries, European Union states, doesn't it?
Exactly. Ireland's not trying to leave the EU. But if Britain were to just walk out the door to have this no deal that mainly English people want, I don't hear it so much in Scots, Northern Ireland, or even Welsh people. It is a mainly English problem. And don't get me wrong, I live here. I love this country.
Same here.
Brilliant place.
It's a certain type of Englander. You could almost call it Little Englander.
Yeah, well, I never knew there were so many about until the last 3 years. But it's
should have had a clue from the fact the Daily Mail and the Sun sold so well, shouldn't we? But there you go.
In short, they've been sold alive for about the last 40 years, day in, day out, by the Mail and the Telegraph and others, and the Sun, that in some way Europe was bad. And Europe isn't perfect. It's got things that need to be reformed. It may have expanded too quickly. There's lots of things you could say. But bottom line is, from a trading point of view, it's the only game in town for Britain. And to in some way walk away, to have this no deal and to revert to WTO rules, it's delusional. Businesses, I've talked to guys and they go, oh yeah, we'd have maybe 5-10 years of economic decline. That's a huge part of your life and your kids' lives. That's not something that anyone with a rational brain signed up for.
Mate, I've heard Rhys Mogg and Digby Jones talk about 50 or 100 years.
Yeah, but they can afford it. Living down a Cowley...
No, I know they can. I'm just saying 5 or 10 years is...
optimistic.
Yeah.
I can't afford 2 years of... I'm not going to name the company, but I work for a German company that manufactures cars in Oxford. And you think they're going to stick around, or any of the other large car manufacturers? Because none are...
I'm going to get my little menu of clips back together, actually, Dermot, because there's two there I should have played already. The first is Theresa May explaining exactly what you've just said about the Good Friday Agreement, and the second was Digby Jones stating the precise opposite of what you've just said about the car industry. And this is where my current confusion comes from, and I know that I'm still labouring under the illusion that if you keep hitting feelings with facts, eventually the facts will prevail. I'm not quite as sure of that as I used to be as a human being, let alone as a political commentator. But those are the facts. So the fact now is that what's changed? The Prime Minister described the Good Friday Agreement accurately. Digby Jones described what the German car industry would do in a way that is so inaccurate we need to invent a new German compound verb. And yet they still, Jones in particular, will still somehow be punting WTO terms or no-deal Brexit. This is almost existential for me now. If you stand up in pub, it's like chicken licking, right? When they realised that the sky wasn't falling in, Brexit now is marching around the country with your eyes shut, claiming that it still is, right? Pretty much. They've got the evidence. The sky isn't falling in. An acorn dropped on your head. But they're still marching up and down the country saying the sky is falling in, the sky is falling in. I don't get it anymore.
But they'll tell you that it was all fear-mongering or scaremongering.
But they can't do that now because they're saying that no deal is a good thing to do. And when you suggested that crashing out with no deal was even a possibility prior to June 2016, you'd be laughed out of town. I don't think I ever heard the phrase until about autumn of that year.
But we got for sterling, you got about €1.30 at the time, just before June 16. You now get €1.16. That's Britain's buying power, and they say, "Oh, that just affects your foreign holidays."
That was an early clue about how desperate they'd be, wasn't it, to rewrite reality? Because they started claiming it was good for exports or something like that without realising.
You've got to buy your raw materials.
I know that, and you know that. I've been on a crash course myself. It's good for exports. What does that mean? It means that foreign companies can fill their boots with British goods because we've banjaxed our own currency.
Yeah,
and that's patriotism. We might as well just give it all away.
But
that'd be really patriotic.
Yeah, but if you go for the Theresa May deal, you're going to be in for another 7 years of negotiations to get to a trade deal that cannot be as good as we currently have.
And that's why the only alternative now is either to vote for that or to go down the no deal or no Brexit route. And the no deal route...
Or to remain.
Well, that's what no Brexit means, mate. Come on, keep up, dammit.
Oh, sorry, no Brexit.
No deal or no Brexit, deal, yeah. which is where the rational universe moves, but you've still got these deeply irrational players selling tickets for the ghost train, telling lies, drumming up racism, and if we haven't learned how successful that can be in the last 5 years, then we've learned nothing. Sadly, as not for the first time, I think it's my profession. It's my profession that shoulders the most responsibility for this. How can you have people back now in the public mainstream talking about raping MPs? Answer: because you have allowed vile individuals onto Question Time, you've allowed them onto radio stations, television stations, you've given them newspaper columns, and that shifts the window of acceptability, which means that if you want to be outrageous, you've got to go even further than the people who are now popping up all over your telly. And they will. Some self-interested, self-promoting charlatan will come along and go even further. And he'll probably get a column. It's 11:46. Yeah, it had nothing to do with the 350 million quid on the side of the bus. It had nothing to do with immigration. It had nothing to do with trade. It had nothing to do with the expectation of deals and arrangements that would be superior to what we currently had. I used to joke that all they'd be left with eventually was blue passports and fish, but of course it turned out, A, that we could have had blue passports all along. It was just a matter of national choice not to, and B, that the reason why our fishing industry has suffered in recent years has an awful lot to do with the fact that we're pretty much the only country in the European Union that allowed fishing companies to sell their quotas to foreign rivals. So I don't know what's left. No one's still punting the sovereignty line, are they? That white paper that came out within a few weeks of Brexit stated categorically the British Parliament has always been sovereign. So where has this no-deal thing come from? Genuine answers welcome. Michael's in South Ockenden. Michael, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. First-time caller, so please be gentle.
I'll do my best.
Right. I think it's actually written into the EU legislation. If you read the Lisbon Treaty, and I'm not talking about the abridged version that someone got completely wrong. I'm talking about... It
wasn't abridged, was it?
Well, it was someone's opinion, basically.
No, it was completely invented and presented on social media as fact when it was complete lie after lie after lie after lie.
Yeah. Well, I hope you'll appreciate that I sort of went straight to the source to read as much as I could, and I'm only a carpenter, I don't fully understand it entirely.
Right.
But if you read the wording to it, this period of 2 years that we was given was to negotiate what future relations would be. No, there was never to be any deals because Article 218 of the Lisbon Treaty blocks the EU from discussing trade deals or any other deals which can actually be ratified and signed whilst we are still a member.
Yes,
we actually have to leave.
We're talking about the withdrawal agreement, and then well, this is, I mean, you're right about this, but it was David Davis, of course, who said in the run-up that on the morning after the referendum, he'd be in Berlin, not Brussels, doing deals with and he, of course, ended up being made Brexit secretary.
Yeah, I can't talk for who's been given the jobs. I'm sure we can all disagree on
But you have, under the terms of Article 50, you have a 2-year I mean, that's why the clock started ticking the minute Article 50 was triggered. And then you introduce the sequencing, which is how much we have to pay, reciprocal arrangements ideally for EU citizens. And then once the withdrawal agreement is in place, you start negotiating future trading relations. I think...
So once we've left, with the EU is blocked from discussing that until after we've left.
Yes, once the withdrawal agreement is passed, we've left. That is then complete and the trading negotiations can start. So if we'd got the withdrawal agreement through a week after Brexit, we could have spent the last 2 years negotiating future trading arrangements.
Of course we could have, yes, but that hasn't happened, has it?
No, because all of the things that people were expecting to get as a result of those negotiations have turned out to be undeliverable.
Well, I mean, you've had a lot of confusion up there. There's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions in Parliament.
There's only one fact,
can't really agree on it.
There's only one fact. There's never a multiple opinion. So where do you think the no-deal nonsense came from?
Well, that's exactly what I say. I believe that it's coming from the fact that in the EU documents surrounding the Lisbon Treaty, we were told that if there wasn't an agreement within 2 years, then it would have to be no deal and negotiate
No. It doesn't say that in the Lisbon Treaty.
It doesn't say, no, but it does say that there is a period of 2 years after which you must leave. It doesn't say that you can
we've already extended that.
Extension.
We've already
but
extended that.
There's no mention of an extension in the EU framework.
Well, the problem, unless I've misunderstood you, is that I'm describing reality, and you're saying, yeah, but.
That's very easy to say, James.
Well, have we or have we not extended the withdrawal agreement?
No, we have, but then.
So can we describe that as reality? So can we describe that as reality then? The thing, what has actually happened?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Right, and now you're saying, yeah, but.
Yeah, I asked you to be gentle, James.
I am. I'm just describing reality, but not controversially, as things that have actually happened, and you're saying, yeah, but.
No, your question was, where do I think that the notion of a no deal came from? And
so who first mentioned... No, you didn't. You gave me, with much love and respect, you can't come on and say, I'm a carpenter, I don't really understand things, and then when I point out that you've misunderstood something, you're not going to get the hump, are you? Because you've already set yourself up for admitting that you don't really understand things.
No.
So that's all good. We're all agreed on that. The extension to the withdrawal, the extension to Article 50 has actually happened, so that's reality. That's not a subject of debate or... even conversation, because it has happened. No, you can't say, yeah, but...
There is a legal challenge against that going through the High Court at the moment. So where do you stand on that?
It has happened, Michael. The Article 50 has been extended.
Challenge.
So now we go back to the question of where did you get the idea that no deal was a good thing from?
Well, I would have left with no deal the day after the referendum.
Exactly. So where did you get that idea from?
Well, I didn't quite understand that was what... We've all learnt a lot in the last 2 years. I didn't quite understand the framework for us leaving was quite so difficult. You know, so I would have been more than happy.
The framework for us leaving isn't. The framework for us leaving isn't difficult. The framework for us leaving on terms that satisfy Brexiters is impossible to achieve. That's been the big lesson.
Well, it's not, is it? Because
we're back to reality, Michael. We're back to reality. Who stopped the withdrawal agreement getting through?
Yes, but the withdrawal agreement didn't satisfy anyone on the leave side.
Well, I just said that.
Yeah, well, and then you were saying, well, why didn't it get through?
Because the things that they were expecting were impossible to deliver.
Impossible to deliver for whom?
Anyone. Reality. You can't have your cake and eat it. You can't turn up... Mate, you began by saying, you pointed out yourself, you can't turn up in Brussels, in Berlin, the day after the result and start doing independent trade deals with Germany, like David Davis said you could. You can't have your cake and eat it, like Boris Johnson said. So these are the people that couldn't vote for the withdrawal agreement because they'd made promises that have turned out to be unkeepable. So let's just take it back.
Hold on, James. We can't turn up the day after because we're still an EU member. If we were not an EU member, we could have sent as many envoys over there as we'd have liked.
I know. We're saying the same thing, Michael.
The
point I'm making is that millions of people who voted for the Brexit, that you understand was always impossible, they voted for it because they thought it was possible. I like that sound effect. Really. So you can't disagree. You can't disagree.
If we'd have left, we could have then negotiated, couldn't we?
After we'd paid the £50 million and passed a withdrawal agreement, yes.
There's no mention that we've got to pass a withdrawal agreement, and that's where the no.
What do you think Article 50? What's the countdown to? What's the 2 years for?
It's a negotiation period.
Right, to negotiate what?
For the future.
To negotiate what?
Future relationships.
No,
future relationships with regard to the single market.
No, that's what happens after Article 50 has been completed. That's what happens after the withdrawal agreement has been passed. You literally began by saying something right, that we can't do the trade agreements until we've passed the withdrawal agreement, and now you're saying the opposite of the bit you got right.
I don't think I am saying the opposite.
No.
I'm saying that in order to negotiate those, we need to leave.
Yes, but we can't leave until we've got a withdrawal agreement through Parliament, and you can't get a withdrawal agreement through Parliament because of people like Boris Johnson in there who made promises that withdrawal agreements can't keep. So we'll close...
I suppose the only way to sort this is another general election.
No, it's the only way to sort this is with a referendum, because then you'd know what... you'd know then, because you were the only person in the country who woke up the morning after the European Union referendum and knew what it really meant, Michael. Surely now that lots of other people understand it...
I've learned a lot over the last 2 years.
I don't think you have.
It wasn't...
Well, tell me this then.
You have, but that's what opinions are.
These are not opinions.
You are opinionated, James, and this is your opinion.
These are not
opinions.
These are not opinions. The duration of Article 50... OK, so you think it's an opinion that Article 50 has been extended?
No, I don't think that's an opinion.
Right, then it's a fact. And finally, we find something we can agree on. Before you go, who would you point to prior to June 2016 as the biggest cheerleaders for a no-deal Brexit? Who do you think called it right and prepared the population for the possibility?
I'll tell you, you're asking a very difficult question there, but I'd say the only person that's ever come close to mentioning, even similar to what I'm saying, is Nigel Farage.
No, he said we could be like Switzerland or Norway, mate. I'm saying prior to June 2016, who talked about no-deal Brexit as being preferable or desirable?
No, he also said that we could agree a free trade agreement, but we would leave the union first.
But everybody knows that. Last chance, who talked up no deal? Who talked up no deal?
Well, plenty of people have. I can't really remember if I'm
just
honest
one,
with you. Then. Well, I know Theresa May's mentioned it just because you've just reminded me of that.
No, that was after the referendum. Prior to the referendum. Again, that's a fact, not an opinion. The word prior means before. Who talked up no deal?
I think Farage did mention it because he did say
he said we could be like Switzerland or Norway. They have deals. So who talked up no deal?
You're selecting one of his speeches from prior to.
Well, you mean he said? You mean he contradicted himself? He said two things that couldn't possibly coexist together. Surely not,
not
Michael.
Necessarily, no.
Surely not.
But these are the lies and the spin.
Oh right, here we go.
Because Nigel Farage was criticising the return of our customs union and regulatory alignment. In 2015, he was arguing for exactly the same thing, saying that we could leave the European Union just like Norway had done, which is still a member of the single market. Like they left
Norway never joined. What are you talking about?
It was in 2015.
What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about, the lies that you told.
I said no deal is better than a bad deal, Anna. I argued it all through the referendum, day after day after day. You clearly weren't listening. You never do you? And I think we're going to finish up in the spring of 19, effectively with a Norwegian-type deal, which is not what the people of this country voted for, which is not what the people of this country voted for. Well, I have to say that everybody from David Cameron to half this panel say, wouldn't it be terrible if we were like Norway and Switzerland? Really? They're rich, they're happy, they're self-governing. Actually, Norway can afford to give people money. It's rich. It's successful. Norway. They're rich. They top the world's happiness index. They're allowed to catch their own fish. It would be ghastly if this country was like Norway. Can you imagine it? Rich, free, catching your own fish. Norway sells 75% of its overseas goods to the European marketplace. It trades with the European marketplace at a premium. It has opted to be a member of the European Economic Area, which is, in a sense, an anti-room for European Union.
He would say they'd have to pay the cash and have none of the decision-making power.
Well, that is straightforward untrue, because actually they don't pay their money to Brussels, they pay their money directly to some of the poorer emerging southern and eastern European countries. Norway. They will put up with some of the rules, but they won't put up with all of the rules. But this idea that somehow life is worse in Norway and Switzerland. I heard Commissioner Pascal Lamy, the Trade Commissioner, say, well, if Britain was to reject the Lisbon Treaty, we would be relegated to a country the status of Norway.
Rich, free, catching your own fish.
Well, actually, Norway, Iceland and Switzerland do pretty well.
The Norwegians,
we're told Norway doesn't have a seat at the top table. Oh, yes, it does.
Norway.
We're told that Norway has to accept all the rules. Oh, no, they don't. Norway sits at the World Trade Organization. We don't.
And I think we're going to finish up in the spring of 19, effectively with a Norwegian-type deal, which is not what the people of this country voted for.
You don't even want Norway's status, Iceland. No. So you want it to be a country completely alone in all the world.
Alone. Look, nobody really knew. You never knew what was going to happen. I never knew what was going to happen.
I knew.
No, you didn't.
Of course I did.
You didn't.
July 2017, mate. Nigel Farage will be back. Not as quickly as last time. He has to distance himself from the reality of Brexit before he comes back bleating about betrayal. And people like you are the reason why he's back. Final chance. Who talked up no deal before the referendum?
Nigel Farage.
OK, we've been there, mate. We've done it. And now this is why you think opinions are worth the same as facts. They can't be, Michael. They can't be worth the same as facts. But you're right. We're living in a world where they have been rendered equivalent. Here's a fact. Here's an opinion. Here's Michael, who thinks they're worth the same. We are still searching for the cheerleaders, the champions of no-deal Brexit from pre-referendum UK. So it doesn't include Theresa May saying in January that no deal would be better than a bad deal, although it might be worth pausing to examine why that was such a ridiculous thing to say. And it's still out there. It's not just Michael. Still people clinging to stuff that's been comprehensively and completely rubbished. So the idea that you have to threaten to walk away if you're going to have an effective negotiating position. You presume, don't you, that that's what Theresa May fell into believing when she made that ludicrous intervention in January of 2018. I wonder sometimes whether these analogies have been as effective as they deserve to be. But the bottom line on that is, of course, any negotiation from which you threaten to walk away would involve walking back to where you were when the negotiations opened. This is why that phrase, no deal is better than a bad deal, has done such untold and probably permanent damage to our country and our democracy. Because usually you're right. If I live here and you live there and you found somewhere new to live, so you've decided to sell your house, and we enter into negotiations, and I think that you are asking too much of me and you refuse to budge, then I go back to my house. I come back to here. The problem with Brexit and negotiations is that we don't have anywhere to go back to. So no deal becomes a fictional destination which dangerous and dishonest people seek to describe as being desirable. And that's why when you ask them for details, they can't give you any. That should be, I've given up on expecting pennies to drop now, but that should be a point at which people feel their needle nudge a little bit. Hang on a minute, where are we going to live if we don't buy the new house? Well, just live in our old house. No, we can't live in our old house. We've voted to leave our old house. Well, leave means leave. Yes, exactly. But where are we going? Well, I don't know. But it's going to be great. Could you offer up any evidence to back that up? I said, well, yes. I mean, some people say it will only be 50 to 100 years of economic harm before things get better. Well, who voted for that? Nobody. Who's prepared to admit that what they voted for isn't going to happen? Anybody signing up for no deal being a good idea are on the other side of the argument. They're never going to admit it, and there's a lot of them. 7 minutes after 12 is the time. You could not open negotiations on trade deals until the withdrawal agreement was complete. There is an argument that we could have resisted the sequencing a little more strongly than we did, but who was in charge of that negotiation at the time? David Davis. Don't have to be very clever to do this job. Who's still out there punting no deal, the undescribable and undescribed desirable Brexit? David Davis. Who's lending his support to politicians who claim that if they were leading the Conservative Party, they could go back to Brussels and get Brussels to do the thing that they can't do? David Davis. So So where did no deal come from, and how has it managed? Because I think of stuff that takes us by surprise. For me, the idea that jumping out of an aeroplane in the dark with no parachute is what you actually voted for is, even by my standards, and I've done a little bit more of this than most, even by my standards, that's mind-boggling. I voted for £350 million for the NHS. No, I didn't. I knew that was a lie. I voted to curb immigration. No, I didn't. I knew that we wouldn't really be able to... Actually, I knew that we'd end up begging foreign countries to send us our nurses when I voted to leave the European Union to stop immigration. I voted because I thought we'd be richer. No, I didn't. I knew that there'd be economic harm of 50 to 100 years. I voted because we'd get a better trade. No, I knew that when people said the German car industry wouldn't countenance tariffs, I knew that the people who said that were wrong. So what did you vote for? I voted to jump out of an aeroplane in the dark with no parachute. Really? Why? Sovereignty? Oddly, that would be a sovereign thing to do. The minute you rely upon somebody else to catch you, you cease to be fully sovereign. You see? Because you've surrendered some of your agency to them. Arguably, if you put a parachute on your back, you cease to be fully sovereign because you're not relying upon your ability to fly. You're relying upon another element to let you float gently to the ground. What did you vote for? I voted to jump out of an aeroplane in the dark with no parachute. That is no deal Brexit. Why? Well, here's the answer. And this isn't going to win any prizes for perspicacity or insight. But the only way in which somebody like I can understand why somebody like you would vote to jump out of an aeroplane in the dark with no parachute is because you've been successfully persuaded that the aeroplane is intolerable. So where does the no-deal campaigning go? Back to scapegoating the European Union for the idiocy and lies that led us to vote to leave it. But you have to respect the will of the people. Well, the people did not vote to jump out of an aeroplane in the dark with no parachute. Yes, they did. Don't be so patronising. You sneering, condescending metropolitan elite. I voted to jump out of an aeroplane in the dark with no parachute, and how dare you suggest that I didn't? 12:10 is the time. Pick a hole in any of this, 0345 6060 973, and move on if you will, because I did want to do this. Am I going mad when I say I think it might happen? I think they might get the withdrawal agreement through. Or is that customs union thing a bigger stumbling block than I realise? I can't see Labour signing up to a temporary customs union. I can't see the European Union signing up to it either. Anything that allows a future politician, whether from the far left or the far right, to tear up what gets agreed in Parliament will not be countenanced by the European Union. But if Theresa May puts a permanent customs union on the table, probably consigns the Conservative Party in its current form to auto-destruct, Corbyn, who's desperate to avoid a second referendum, would go along with it. Would he bring enough MPs with him? I haven't looked at the odds. What are the odds on a withdrawal agreement getting passed by Parliament? And then, of course, you'd look at whether that customs union was permanent or temporary. And if it was temporary, I think Brussels would send it back again. But if it was permanent, they'd probably go for it. I don't know if you can enshrine in law a permanent customs union without having future governments able to withdraw it. I tell you, the ultimate irony, of course, would be that if you can do that, then we truly would have become all of the things they told us we were when persuading us to leave. 0345 6060 973. I got some phone lines free on this. We haven't really gone all in on Brexit for a while, but this ludicrous notion that people voted for no deal, people voted for the opposite of what every Leave campaigner told them was going to happen, merits a little bit of explanation, doesn't it? Or a little bit of exploration. Every single Leave campaigner ruled it out. The literature ruled it out. The pledge was there would be a deal from all of the campaigners. And now they're trying to tell you that you voted all along for no deal. Why are you letting them do that? Simeon's in Westminster. Simeon, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Happy Tuesday.
Thank you very much. Well reminded.
Yes, indeed. So I think your question about, obviously, when it came into the mainstream, I'm absolutely convinced that it was Theresa May's speech sort of post-Brexit that no deal was better than a bad deal. And I think that she was kind of, she was directly speaking to the EU almost. I think she was forgetting the fact that, the country was listening as well. And she was forgetting the fact that when you add it onto the rhetoric of, Brexit means Brexit and leave means leave, suddenly this kind of no deal versus, a bad deal sort of gains power. And the ironic thing is, the EU kind of doing almost everything they can to avoid a no deal, to Brexiters almost seems like another act of defiance from the EU, not letting us leave without a deal. So it's almost kind of casting them
except what has been shown by the continuing refusal to, quote, reopen the withdrawal agreement that was negotiated and changed by the European Union at Theresa May's request. The idea that they would reopen it and make even more changes damaging to their own position has been completely rubbish now, and yet still they go on about it. So I understand what you're saying. I don't think there's going to be a definitive answer to the question of where no deal got its wings from, but the problem I have with the idea that it's a negotiation tactic of Theresa May's that has backfired is that would mean she knew all along that it was never going to happen, and now the likelihood is that it will happen.
I think she really never thought she'd get to this position. I genuinely think when she said that, it was a way of almost trying to strong arm or bluff the EU into. So she
drove the car to the dealership. She put it in the crusher, and then she opened up negotiations, which she was prepared to walk away from and get back in her old car. Oh, that's what you think she did?
Yeah. I do. I genuinely do.
Well, Occam's razor, I think, is probably on your side, or the old Sherlock Holmes adage about once you eliminate the impossible, whatever you are left with, however improbable, must be the truth. Why would Theresa May have floated no deal unless she failed to understand? And if that was January 2017, that was before the general election, so she was still being advised by Nick Timothy, wasn't she? Which does really broaden the possibilities of things that she might have failed to understand because the people she trusted were so wrong about so much. Not least the decision to call that general election. OK, a little game for you. Which prominent Brexiter said Britain would still have access to the single market if we left the European Union? There's quite a lot to choose from there, but I just want your personal favourite. And which one said, I never said it would be a beneficial thing to leave? OK, so that this is our attempt to understand where this idea that jumping out of an aeroplane in the dark with no parachute is what 17.4 million people voted for. Blind Brexit, no deal Brexit, call it what you will. Which one said, I never said it would be a beneficial thing to leave? And which one said we would still have access to the single market if we left the EU? Oh, access is a moot, isn't it, there? Of course you've got access to the single market. You just have to pay for it in a way that you don't currently. We pay for access to the single market as a sort of flat fee. Of course, access to the single market under WTO terms or under a no-deal Brexit would involve us paying every single time we bought or sold something. 19 minutes after 12 is the time. I'm really interested in the evolution of no deal. So we've got Theresa May saying it in January 2017, no deal is better than a bad deal, a statement of such utter absurdity and fatuousness that I think even Theresa May, it's surprising that she went that low. Why would she do that? Answer, because she'd bought into that idea that you negotiate with people by torching your escape route, torching your route home. You remember when Hansel and Gretel went into the woods and they left that little trail of breadcrumbs behind them? The trail of breadcrumbs is what allows you to walk away from a negotiation, OK? So if you're worried about things not going the way that you wanted, the trail of breadcrumbs is what allows you to go back to where you started. Brexit was a vote to abolish breadcrumbs, to leave. Leave means leave. Brexit means Brexit. It means we had nowhere to go back to except the unknown and the unknowable, which now people tell me they voted for. They voted for the unknown and the unknowable. So why did we bother having a referendum campaign? Why did we have that big bus with £350 million on the side if 17.4 million people knew it wasn't true? Why did we listen to people like Boris Johnson if 17.4 million people knew what he was saying was not true? Why was Turkey so front and centre if 17.4 million people knew that Turkey wasn't going to join anytime soon, or probably ever under Erdogan's current regime? Why did that breaking point poster get unveiled at all if everybody knew that it contained people in the Balkans who'd made their way from the Middle East and had no chance whatsoever of turning up here anytime soon? And, of course, you knew that. So what did you vote for? And who said, I never said it would be a beneficial thing to leave? Vanessa's in Wokingham. Vanessa, I just realised that Wokingham should be the The land of the millennials, shouldn't it? It's where... No, that's rubbish. No, stop it. No, stop it. I was just going to say it's where all the woke people live, but that's a rubbish joke, and it doesn't even deserve... Thank you. Carry on.
The woke people... if we got Redwood as an MP, I'm afraid everybody's in some kind of coma.
Yes, it's a mistitled... Wokingham.
Yeah, mistitled, but I don't know, woke isn't he? Does that mean people? I don't know. Anyway, hi James, big fan. Hey, I know I'm going to be sounding like I'm going into the realms of conspiracy theories here, but I honestly believe, and I'm talking to, I mean, I am an arch Remainer, as you probably remember. I believe that the Brexiters, who are the rich, the very rich, and that, believe me, they are funded by unbelievable amounts of money, which we're digging to find out where is it coming from, especially in this new Brexit campaign.
A lot of people made a ton of money when the pound crashed on that night, and a lot of the informed analysis is that when a certain individual claimed publicly that he thought he'd lost, that was when the markets moved to the benefit. But that could just be a coincidence, Vanessa. You know, we live in a complicated universe.
No, I don't believe that.
Come off it. It's not like he got photographed pointing at a graph showing the collapse of the pound on the night of the actual referendum result, Vanessa. Give the man a break.
He got tipped off by people.
No. Oh, by polling.
Before.
Well, we shall see. Anyway, why did you ring in?
Anyway, well, I honestly believe that they thought it would be easy to get, by all these other ploys that are now proven to be useless, as you pointed out. And here we are at a point where we may not even leave because of the situation economically and everything else that's come about by Theresa May's bad dealings, etc. But I do believe that these people are now desperate enough to get this no deal out as a kind of brainwashing ploy. I know this is going into the realms of fantasy, but they're working on it.
It's not fantasy at all. Oh, I see. The effort that goes into it might be fantasy. I don't know whether we're going to see a reprise of the Facebook manipulations and things. But brainwashing is a very strong word and quite an insulting one. But people are being persuaded to believe that they voted for something that they didn't vote for.
And for them, this is because they can see an end game where they have a vision for this country, which, the people on the streets don't realise that would be really detrimental to them, because it's like...
come on, again, Vanessa, I must gallop to their defence. It's not as if they've publicly stated support for an insurance system to replace the NHS, is it? Hang on, no, my mistake, you carry on.
Well, anyway, God knows what will happen to the NHS if these people get their hands on the
Can we at least agree that chlorinated chicken is delicious and nutritious?
No.
All right, carry on.
Sorry, I'm not with you there either. No. But I believe that they are so intent on getting their Singapore-style vision for this country through that this no-deal Brexit situation has been slowly drip-fed into the system and has now taken root. And these people, it's gone beyond the realms of normality now. Believe any fantasy you like, but I do believe that they honestly feel that a no-deal is going to be great because they're going to get their country back, and it's going to be, it's, as somebody else has said, it's a religion. And these people at the top are literally puppet leaders who are manipulating them because they want to turn this country into something which will make them very rich. It's like Rees-Mogg's father's book. I can't remember what it's called, but it's the peasants and the people. That we will be working for them, and they will be making loads of money. And
I'm going to pause you slightly because I sense that if I don't, we may crash right through into Sheila Fogarty's show. But I mean, obviously that's pot kettle black on my part, but also because. And I'm guilty of this as well, probably, although I guard against it. I try to guard against it. That won't describe everyone. There'll be some people. It certainly doesn't describe Bill Cash, for example, who is a prominent Brexiter who's having a tough time at the moment squaring his lifelong convictions with the unfolding reality. But he certainly doesn't want this country to lapse into some regulationless free-for-all for toxic capitalists.
But they are very right-wing, if you like, and they are...
Some of them are just stupid.
Okay, well, yes. Absolutely. Or they are feeling so patriotic, which is another problem we have.
It's not patriotism to damage your country, is it?
No, but it's standing tall alone, and they have their own vision of a Britain that will stride out on the waves. It's a sort of empire.
But the waves have to leave. I mean, this is the thing I find most baffling, is when they say we can strike our own trade agreements. Well, they mean, obviously, we can strike them as a non-EU member, as an individual nation. But there's no such thing. The only people you can sign your own trade agreements with are yourself. As soon as you sign a trade agreement with someone else, you surrender what they think sovereignty means.
Exactly. You have to pool sovereignty, even under WTO, whatever, because the word is in.
Well, at least, hang on, I'm just going to pause you again. I would point out that at least the WTO is run exclusively by people elected by the British electorate, and it doesn't contain any foreign unelected bureaucrats whatsoever, and all of the rules that the WTO would impose upon the United Kingdom in the events of a blind Brexit would have all been specifically framed, written and passed by the UK Parliament, Vanessa. So, you know, hang on, my mistake
that's
again.
Wrong.
Yes.
That's completely wrong. And you know, you're playing devil's advocate to a certain extent, because a lot of people do think that. But
that's my favourite one, actually. Out of all of the nonsense, I think my favourite bit of nonsense is this idea: what do we want? Freedom and sovereignty. How are we going to get it? By signing up to WTO rules that none of us actually understand or were even previously aware of, and which the former head of the WTO, Pascal Lamy, has described as an apocalyptic disaster.
Exactly. And surely it's in the name. Rules. The rules there we have to also follow and pool our sovereignty on that score, and it's going to be much, much worse. But you see, they've been so brainwashed, and I'm sorry, it is.
No, I know. I just try. I hear you. Do you? Are you an admirer of the Olympic rower Matthew Pinsent by any chance, Vanessa?
Not really, but I think they brought him on for.
He's an admirer of you. He's an admirer of you. Yes. He's just tweeted to say, I love it when an LBC caller misses James's tongue-in-cheek references and says, no, I can't agree with you there.
No, he's twisted that, hasn't he?
No, he hasn't. He's doing what you described as devil's advocacy, because when I said the chlorinated chicken line, I think you thought for a minute I was being serious. But at least we're delighting Matthew. Vanessa, thank you very much indeed. I haven't got time to squeeze in another one. The question isn't getting answered. I mean, Vanessa's analysis is very negative, I think. Accurate. Brainwashing is a word that I don't think helps, but it might actually be accurate. That simple question of when did 17.4 million people vote to leave the European Union without the deal that every single prominent campaigner telling them to vote to leave the European Union insisted would not only be easy to achieve, the easiest deal in human history, but would be demonstrably superior to the trading terms and conditions that we currently have. That is the most astonishing upshot. After 3 years of pointing out astonishing upshots and weapons-grade contradictions, and I get it now, I do understand that for a lot of people none of this matters. None of this matters because you have been persuaded that there is a dragon just on the other side of that hill. There's a massive dragon and it wants to kill you and eat your children, and it's called the European Union. So it doesn't matter what anybody says, it doesn't matter what anybody does, it doesn't matter what facts are presented. You believe there's a dragon, and you will move heaven and earth to slay it. But it doesn't exist. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can't prove it doesn't exist. You can't prove the non-existence of a non-existent thing. And if someone's whispering in your ear, it exists. It exists. It exists, and it wants to harm you. I think that is brainwashing, but I also think that it's probably an unhelpful description, and that's where we are. Do you think this would work later in the week? It's already Tuesday, remember, bank holiday fans, don't get distracted. But Sir Julian King, who is the European Commissioner for Internal Security, he's called for the EU to do more, as well as national governments to do more, to tackle hate speech online. And he's described the abuse that Jess Phillips has faced recently as shaming Britain in the eyes of Europe. He says, this is just disgraceful. The rest of Europe looks on, and asked what has happened to British politics. He wrote on Twitter yesterday. I get how it works, you know. If I was a Sun columnist, or if I thought you were too stupid to understand complicated issues, I'd now say, how dare he criticise Britain, even though he's British? How dare he criticise Britain? Look at what's happening in Hungary. See, if you can turn everything into a slanging match, you achieve enormous power. It's power built upon fraudulence, but it's still real power. So I just felt a little, what's the word I want? I just felt a little sort of small flourishing of disapproval there, because I'm reading what he said about Britain, and I know he's right, but because he's criticising my country, even though he is a fellow countryman, because he's criticising my country, I get how easy it is then to just go, oh yeah, but what aboutery? And you could easily say in the context of the European Union, hang on a minute, this UKIP character is pretty despicable in the context of saying that he might rape a Labour MP. But what's happening in Hungary, in the context of Viktor Orban's regime, is actually being done by governments, not by idiotic sideshows. But that's not the point, is it? It's a bit like the Corbyn lot, who I tweet something like, journalists have to do more to stop racism and fascism being validated and normalised in the British media. Journalists have to call it out more. Corbyn's lot will, and I mean the hardcore support, not everybody who votes Labour or everybody who thinks Jeremy Corbyn might be the answer to the country's problems. The absolute loyalists, they reply by saying something like, oh yes, but what about austerity? Why haven't journalists spoken out against austerity? And you look at this and you think, but I'm talking about fascism. You go, it's not either or. There's a million things that you can simultaneously sustain. There's a million positions you can simultaneously sustain. You can have a very, very strong view on austerity and on racism. You can have a very, very strong view on anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. You can have a very, very strong view on it. But of course, if everything is viewed through the lens of having picked a team, it doesn't matter what you're talking about. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about sweets in Marks and Spencer's or the President of the United States of America. It's all about having a fight. It's incredible, really, to think about it. But the question I'm interested in later this week is whether or not we could answer that. When Sir Julian King, the European Commissioner for Internal Security, says, this is just disgraceful, the rest of Europe looks on and asks, what has happened to British politics? Is that a question you could answer? Would that work for us as a conversation later in the week? Just drop me a tweet at Mr. James OB or a text. Should we get the emails back up and running soon? Having been swamped, it turns out that I can actually turn off some of the stuff that tells me what was happening on LBC at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning. I don't need to have my inbox absolutely jam-packed with stuff that isn't of particular interest to me when I come into work on a Tuesday. But so we're taking back control of our email account. But in the meantime, I would like to do that. This is just disgraceful. The rest of Europe looks on and asks, what has happened to British politics? For me, the short answer here, in the case of a UKIP candidate suggesting that he might rape a Labour MP, the short answer is UKIP, right? What has happened to British politics? UKIP. But that wouldn't necessarily make an hour of radio. Do you think you could have a crack at that in a slightly more sophisticated fashion? We shall find out later in the week. We will also, I think, be returning our attention to the story that got squeezed out today, which is some fascinating research regarding social media, and the suggestion from the latest research that it doesn't actually do anything like as much damage to teenagers as has previously been reported and or suspected. In fact, the senior author of the new paper describes sloppy science having been prevalent in previous research, and the whole issue, the whole phenomenon became a sort of chicken and egg problem where evidence that cause and effect ran both ways admitted sloppy science. I like that. I find it very, very interesting. 12:40 is the time. I'm trying to pin down no deal, and it's an almost impossible task for me, partly as a result of what we just described, because if you've picked a side, you're not really interested in working out the rules of the game. And on no deal, I'm afraid nobody picked a side. January 2017, what we have come up with, David Davis, is the idea of a comprehensive free trade agreement and a comprehensive customs agreement that will deliver the exact same benefits as we have. So even in the beginning of 2017, the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union was saying we'll have exactly the same benefits that we currently have. And in the intervening... it's 2 years, good grief, what a waste. In the intervening 2 and a bit years, 17.4 million people have been told that they actually voted to have none of the benefits that we currently have. And some of them have agreed. And those are the people I'm most interested in. People who voted for Brexit because there was going to be £350 million for the NHS, or because it would be the easiest deal in human history, or because the German car industry would never allow tariffs to be introduced, or because we'd have exact same benefits, because we could have our cake and eat it, because we could be like Norway or Switzerland. All of those things that were offered up during the campaign are now being presented by hardcore Brexiters as things their supporters knew weren't true. Britain has arrived in a space where prominent political and media figures are saying, you didn't believe anything I told you when I told you to vote for Brexit, and that's why you voted for Brexit. That's what we've become as a country. And leaving aside that you've got candidates threatening to rape other politicians, just think about that. What you now have from the ERG down is prominent Brexit supporters in politics and in the media saying, you voted for Brexit because you didn't believe me when I told you to vote for Brexit. And because the alternative is to admit error, mistake, or gullibility, people are going along with it. You're absolutely right. I voted for Brexit because I didn't believe the people who told me to vote for Brexit. I don't know how that's happened, but I've got a horrible feeling that Theresa May's line about no deal being better than a bad deal is what opened the door for the next stage of the con to kick in. And I still don't quite understand why she did it. No deal is better than a bad deal. Yeah. Like no lifeboat is better than a small lifeboat. Ruth's in West Hampstead. Ruth, can you unravel this one?
Oh, I could try. I think the only person who knows why Theresa said that is probably Theresa herself and maybe one or two others.
Nick Timothy will know. He probably wrote it.
Nick Timothy, I'm sure. Nick Timothy, who wrote it, definitely. And I can remember listening to her saying it. It's clear as anything.
What did it mean? This is a slightly good meta question for a radio phone-in. What do you think she meant when she said it?
I don't know if she really meant anything. I think it was kind of the same as strong and stable. Brexit means Brexit. It probably looked good on paper. It was, sop to people that really wanted Brexit. I mean, she might have been leaned on by the ERG to put it in there, going back to kind of Vanessa's point, with people that definitely want to push this.
No, but again, I'm just going to clarify that. There are people in the ERG who are heavily invested in funds and similar that will benefit enormously from us chopping off our economic legs on the world stage. But it's also full of people who would struggle to tie their own shoelaces, like Mark Francois and Andrew Bridgen. They're not sinister conspirators. They're just half-wits.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know, James. I mean, only she can answer it, really.
Fair enough.
But she boxed. I mean, I listened to her and I just thought, what have you done? I remember talking to Eddie Mayer very soon afterwards and just saying, she's like in a box within a box because she's boxed herself in so far. There's no way to get out of it. And I think
can't have been that soon afterwards. He didn't. He's only been here 10 minutes. This was back in January.
It might have been after the kind of Chequers thing. So it was kind of in sort of sequence. But Chequers was just another kind of version of boxing herself in even more.
Writing it down boxes her in. But
totally. And I think Brexit is so intellectually challenging that you get people that their intellects are not up to all of the detail, and nor should they be, because they've got lives to carry on with. You've got people, I know really intelligent people that are no dealers now, and I think that
what do they think it means? What do they think it means?
Well, I think the only take I can get from it is that they consider themselves clever, which they are, but this questions their intellect, and their ego cannot deal with that.
Right, because they'd have to say they made a mistake 3 years ago, and so any fig leaf that they can be offered.
Absolutely. And even I look
at... postponement of reality, not even a denial, is it? It's just a postponement.
Of course it is. And I was listening to the news last night, James, and they were talking about, this possible... temporary customs union with the Labour Party. And I thought, well, that doesn't make sense intellectually, because the transition and the backstop are a form of temporary customs union. So why is this any different from what we already have?
They'd be the extending the transition agreement indefinitely or to the next election, but they're not going to do that. And then you have Johnson and Raab both planning to campaign on we'll go back to Brussels. That is, again, I suspect, like you, that's the point at which you go, what? I mean, that old adage, whether it's true or not, is certainly perceptive, about Albert Einstein defining insanity as doing the same thing over and over and over again in the hope of getting a different outcome. It is just bizarre. But the no deal thing, we still haven't nailed its nativity. Where did it come from? Was it just that line of Theresa May's, or was it out there already? Oh, and no one's successfully guessed who said, I never said it would be a beneficial thing to leave. Who do you think said that in the run-up to the referendum? No, after the reality had begun to bite. 12:47 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. My second favourite political journalist, Lewis Goodall, who plies his trade at Sky News, picked up on the question I asked a long time ago about whether or not anybody prior to the referendum campaign talked up no deal, or if anyone even suggested that it was a possible destination. Is there a single recorded case of a Brexit campaigner telling voters we would or even might end up with no deal? And Lewis Goodall writes, this is a crucial point. Voters were assured they would get a deal. Indeed, that it was guaranteed. If Leave campaigners have changed their mind and decided that a deal is not desirable, that's another thing. But anyone who lived through that campaign knows it's not what was promised. And that's what we've spent much of today's programme trying to examine. How you've managed to persuade yourself that it wasn't promised. And Lewis goes on, indeed, if the Prime Minister were a more nimble political player, she might have successfully argued that it is she, not the Brexiters, who is seeking to implement the true mandate of the referendum. Alas, as we know, she is not. And here's the crucial point that I think tallies with our calls today. Indeed, it was the Prime Minister, not the Brexiters, who legitimised the idea of no deal in the public consciousness and muddied the referendum result. As in so many things, she is the author of her own travails. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, if Lewis Goodall of Sky News is your second favourite political journalist, then who on earth is your favourite? I'll tell you tomorrow. Meanwhile, here's Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, with a roundup of the day's events.
There's going to be a meeting at 4 o'clock in the Cabinet Office. We've just been told between some of the most prominent members of the government, including the Environment Secretary Michael Gove, the Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay and the Chief Whip Julian Smith, and they're going to be facing Keir Starmer, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Seamus Milne, we expect.
Seamus Milne?
That's Jeremy Corbyn's Chief Strategist and Director for Communications, to try and find a way through the impasse and to...
Don't they need to find a way through the impasse between Seamus Milne and Keir Starmer before they start trying to find a way through the impasse between... Oh, carry on.
Now, I've been told by the sources, Labour sources, on that in actual fact there's not going to be any deal today, and that is look to the timing that if you are going to have a crucial set of talks to try and find a deal, you wouldn't begin those talks late in the afternoon, well, mid-afternoon at 4 o'clock. So there's not going to be a deal today. Now, of course, Downing Street has set itself a self-imposed deadline of the middle of this week, middle of the week, Wednesday, in order to find a deal with Labour, which, as the Prime Minister's spokesman said today, would need to command a stable majority in the House of Commons in order to avoid another series of indicative votes. Now, tomorrow is the deadline that Downing Street has set itself, because, of course, what it would like to do is to make sure that there is some sort of deal so that when Nigel Farage and others within the Brexit Party find themselves, and the polls are suggesting that they will, standing on a platform on May the 27th, punching their fists in the air and saying they're going to return to Brussels as MEPs, the government will be able to turn around and say, well, actually, we've got a deal with Labour that's got the support of MPs in the House of Commons, and we're sure that we can make sure that you're not going to go back to Brussels.
So when
on July the 2nd. So the elections are inevitably going to take place, James.
Right.
You can't stop the elections. But what the government wants to be able to do in the wake of those European elections is to stop any celebrations amongst members of...
So when do you expect, if Labour and the Conservatives come to some agreement, when do you expect that to be put to Parliament?
It would have to be put middle of next week.
And if it passes, you don't wait until July the 2nd. You just spend the ensuing 6 weeks saying, well, we're having an election, but it doesn't matter.
So you'd spend the next 2 weeks saying, yeah, if you were to do it 10 days at that point, having the election, but saying it doesn't matter, or getting it to a point where at least you could say it doesn't matter. And
well,
then
it wouldn't matter if we had a withdrawal agreement. We'd be withdrawing.
If Parliament can agree it. But there is another problem to this, of course.
The EU have to agree to whatever it is we add to it. And if it's a temporary customs union, they won't. If it's a permanent customs union, they probably will. But that probably self-destructs the Conservative Party.
The other problem, of course, is that there are now a growing number of Labour MPs who want a confirmatory vote or a second referendum, call it
which we don't think Seamus Milne does want.
No, he doesn't want. And, of course, Labour would see a split within
does whatever Seamus Milne tells him.
Yes. And then you see a split in the Labour Party, and of course the key phrase used by Downing Street this morning is that they want a stable majority. Now, if you split the Labour Party, you'd only need to peel off between 80 and 100 Labour MPs to demand a confirmatory second referendum, and given the revolt that you'd see on the Conservative benches, there are question marks now as to whether a deal with Labour could even command a majority in the House of Commons.
Because the Conservatives, in the event of a permanent customs union, would run for the hills.
Yes. And a deal with Labour.
I appreciate. I mean, again, not for the first time. I sort of wish one hadn't had to nail colours to quite so many masts over the 3 years. But surely, in a rational universe, the case for another referendum has become irresistible. If the political logjam is so complete that one side is reduced to claiming that 17.4 million people voted to leave because they knew all the Leave campaigners weren't telling the truth. So the only way you can find out where things now lie would be a referendum. But then, of course, because the no-deal scenario has been so horribly and violently misrepresented, you'd then run the risk of a referendum with no deal on a ballot where people truly might vote to jump out of an aeroplane in the dark with no parachute.
Unless you could avoid what many Remain MPs want, is to put no deal on the ballot paper. But then, of course, you're left with people jumping up and down and saying that they're betraying the will of the British people.
Which is nonsense, but it's halfway around the world as a notion.
So that's where we are.
Can you make it stop? Can you just
I can't make it. You, if anybody can make it stop, you can make it stop, James.
Stop, mate. I can't make anything stop. I mean, oddly, this morning, I always review my feelings on my way into work, even when, thanks to Greta Thunberg, I'm coming in by public transport, and today I had to get a bus, Theo.
Are you really?
Yeah, it won't last, but, you know, I'm doing my bit until the weather turns. I'm trying to work out, and what you have now is, because you've got people who are being utterly patronised and insulted, but they're lapping it up. The idea that they voted for no deal is palpably wrong. But as we've established on the programme, I think conclusively it gives people a postponement of admitting that they got mugged or fell for nonsense or just misunderstood things. But then the fear of them means that more moderate and modest individuals may actually end up wanting this withdrawal agreement to get through, because the prospect of actually somehow jumping out of the aeroplane with no parachute in the dark is growing every day. Therefore, the withdrawal agreement is disastrous on almost every level, but at least it's not disastrous on every level.
I think there's a recognition, though, within the Conservative Party that to jump out of the aeroplane without a parachute, as you put it... In the dark, sorry. You would have to change the Prime Minister. Theresa May has made it clear that she's not going to jump out of the aeroplane in the dark without a parachute.
But she might not have any choice.
That feeds into the fact that Sir Graham Brady, who's the chairman of the 1922 committee, is going into number 10, we expect this afternoon, to tell Theresa May that she needs to give a firm end date, what they've described as a roadmap, the 1922 committee, for her departure, which would be towards the end of June, or July.
And how does that help? Very, very briefly, because Sheila is clearing her throat in the background.
It doesn't change the fundamentals of the parliamentary arithmetic or the deal agreed with the European Union.
It just appeases the emotional incontinence of the ERG.
You end up with a different Prime Minister, potentially. Well, obviously, if you get rid of Theresa May.
And Johnson and Raab both saying they'll go back to Brussels and get them to reopen the withdrawal agreement. Is there any prospect of that happening?
No, there's no prospect of them.
But they're going to campaign on it. Everything's broken.
And then they'll go back to Brussels.
Everything is broken. I'm going to re-record that. Keith, you busy this afternoon? I want to get into the studio. We'll take the tune of Everything is Awesome and we'll replace the word awesome with broken, and we'll top the charts. We'll top the hit parade by the end of the summer holidays. Theo Watchwood, many thanks. Sheila Fogarty, welcome.
Welcome, thank you. I'm sorry about my coughing.
Is it cold enough for you?
It's lovely.
I forgot to turn it up, and I'm absolutely freezing.
You're living my dream.
I am. It's all for the environment.
I've got a very sarcastic cough. We had this conversation before.
We have.
Yeah. I'm sorry. People think I'm trying to make a point, and I'm just clear my throat.